Welcome to Nicstalgia, your favorite pop culture podcast, where we have deep conversations about superficial things. I'm Nicole, your host, and each week we unlock core memories from the 90s, 2000s, and beyond while examining the past through a contemporary lens. Our guests are pop culture tastemakers who explore how our formative experiences shape how we see the world. We talk about trends, fashion, music, identity, consumer behavior, societal attitudes, and more. Nicstalgia is a reminder of how our individual and collective memories make us feel like we belong. And if you like Nicstalgia, be sure to follow, subscribe, rate, review, and share with a friend who loves pop culture as much as we do. Plus, we have a lot of fun. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Nicstalgia. Today, Jessica is here with me, and I'm so excited to have her because she has just some of the funniest videos that I have ever seen in the nostalgia niche, where she really brings together her love for 2000s emo and scene culture, which you already know I'm a big fan of, and her passion for theater as well. So we're going to talk about how she really taps into that creativity and expression and some of her other favorite moments from the 2000s and beyond. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I love your Josie and the Pussycats shirt.
Thank you. I actually just got this and I'm so excited because we used to be obsessed. I made a video about it recently too, but that was like one of my obsessions, and I found this and I'm like, I have to have it. So I am wearing it with every opportunity I can. So
yeah, I recently saw a video where someone actually had a vinyl of the Josie and the Pussycats soundtrack. I'm like, that's incredible and amazing. Something that definitely didn't exist when the movie came out. Right. And I'm like, that's so cool. And I'm slowly replacing all of my regular clothes with nostalgia inspired merch.
I'm like, is it a Paul Frank shirt you have on right now too?
Yes, it is. I got it at Target.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love Paul Frank so much.
Me too. I always love Adelia's moment. And so when I saw this, I'm like, I have to have it. And then they also had a tiered denim skirt. And I'm like, I'm making this outfit my personality until further notice.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Yeah, actually, the lead singer of Letters to Cleo, who is that band that has been in so many different 90s teen movies, the lead singer was the singing voice of Rachel Lee Cook.
Yes, I didn't realize that either because I was really young when that movie came out, and I was like I said, I made that video. I'm like, that is my entire personality until further notice. And I watched it again, and then I was, as I start putting stuff out too, I learned so much as well. But yeah, that's what everyone was telling me. They're like, and then I started listening to like the music, and I'm like, oh, this makes so much more sense now. So, oh my gosh. Yeah, no, that soundtrack is fantastic. I actually was bumping that whole soundtrack in my car. I drove like a 45-minute distance, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna listen to this whole soundtrack, and I'm just like bumping like du jour, and everyone's looking at me like, what is going on? But I'm like, you don't understand this. Honestly, that's probably one of my favorite like 2000s movies that just had like the best soundtrack, hands down.
Yes, two 2000s movie soundtracks that I was fully obsessed with. One was the Charlie's Angels soundtrack. Oh my gosh, and the other was A Walk to Remember, which okay. I don't even think this is terrible, but I don't even think I've seen A Walk to Remember the movie, but I know it's all Mandy Moore, but I know every single song from it because those songs were beautiful.
They were so good, and Mandy Moore is just, and she still is. I'm glad that she's still out acting and singing, but she had some of the most iconic music from the 2000s, and she was like everywhere, and in like Princess Diaries, and just, yeah, she's got a beautiful voice.
Were there any other soundtracks from 2000s movies that you're like, this is my life story from now on?
I would definitely say, I know the Freaky Friday soundtrack too, with like the hypothetical band, That one went way too hard too. It was just so good. There's another one I was trying to remember and I can't think of it. It'll come back to me at the most random moment at like when I'm falling asleep this evening. But yeah, no, I can't. I will say the Lizzie McGuire movie had a really good soundtrack as well. I really liked that one, but I would like, my mom owned a dance studio growing up, so she was always buying CDs. She'd go to Target every Tuesday. She called it Target Tuesday because that's when all the new music would come out. And she would go buy CDs of these either movies or, you know, just like the nows. And so I would just listen to that. And that's kind of like how I got into the music that I was into or the bands. And I would it would spark that interest. But yeah, there's so many good ones that I just can't think of them, of course, right this second. So
that's actually something amazing that you bring up that I want to talk to you about, the fact that your mom owned a dance studio, because I was in the dance studio full time when I was growing up. And
nice.
Yeah, the period between, okay, up until I was about 7 or so, I only listened to my parents' music for the most part. I really didn't listen to the current radio stations. I grew up on Queen and Led Zeppelin and the Beatles. And it wasn't until Spice Girls came out when I was like, okay, now this is my thing. This is my music. And I got I got really into Spice Girls, Celine Dion, Britney Spears, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, and Mariah Carey. Yes. You know, that was my music. And so I think that belonging to a dance studio, that was a major way to discover music. And it was that time in between, okay, I'm no longer just listening to the music of my parents' generation, but before the digital age of, oh, well, now I can go on a random MySpace page and download songs off the internet. You know, like you would listen to songs from a CD without necessarily even knowing who was the singer. And there was, I remember one Enya song that we warmed up to in ballet. And
it's like, gosh.
You're like, what are you supposed to do? You would have to ask your teacher what the name of the song was or something. Plus Enya's songs, a lot of them are melodic and don't necessarily have decipherable lyrics.
Right. You're like, what is it? You try to hum it out. You're like, what was this one song? And then you had to hum it out. You're like, Like, no, I completely agree with that. Enya had some of the best music for like ballet and warm-ups, but no, that's a great point though too, because if you think about it too, and now that I think about it, is there really wasn't a way to like, I guess, discover new music unless you were actively going to like CD stores or that would even record stores, you know, or searching through that or going to shows. Like that was kind of the only way, or, you know, music videos as well. That was a great way to discover new music too. But it's just crazy to think like how much we have changed, and not even a very long time with how we discover new music. But like you said too, the MySpace era really, really changed our way of finding new music. But yeah, you had to listen to it in class. And that was what was interesting for me too, is that I was, you know, a kid growing up, but you know, especially when you have a dance studio, you want to cater the music to what the kids are listening to, because you want it to be exciting and you want it, you know, they want them to connect with it. But then it's funny because I had a very similar experience. But yeah, just hearing stuff through class, or, you know, that was how you discovered new music too.
Yes, I remember whatever my dance teachers listened to, they would read Cosmopolitan magazine. They would listen to, I remember two of my dance teachers specifically. One when I was about, I don't know, 10 years old maybe, and it was mostly elder millennials and young Gen Xers who were the dance teachers at the time. And one of my dance teachers loved Janet Jackson, so we did a Janet Jackson compilation. And so if someone's listening who has never belonged to a dance studio, when you have a dance to a specific song, you listen to that song approximately 500 million times in your life. It's absolutely obscene how many times you listen to the same songs. And so you're like, wow, Janet Jackson. Like, I was born in the 90s. I didn't grow up with her during the peak of her popularity. And so to discover something new for the first time and having that nostalgic glimpse at it is super, super exciting.
It was. Well, and Janet Jackson, both Janet and Michael Jackson were huge in the dance world, especially in the 90s. It was, they were doing it all. They were singing, dancing, and then especially Michael Jackson would have these really like cinematic, like mini movie music videos, and that was huge, and that influenced the dance culture as well. That's when we started to see, and like I always call it the cheese grater video, the one that Janet and Michael Jackson did, where it's all like silver on the inside, and it looks like you're licking on the inside of like a cheese grater. I can't think of that song right off.
Scream?
Scream, yes, that's exactly it. But that was really cool because you saw siblings just dancing, and it's so cool to see that. And then that, I feel like that kind of influenced, the more modernized, the pop star, like where we would see, the dancing and the whole performance element to it, like where, Britney was this incredible dancer, and then you saw Christina, and then it became more of like a full circle act.
Yeah, I was in the convention circuit too starting when I was like 13 or so, and the choreographers who you would go to a ballroom and all day for an entire weekend, you would get to train with these people who were dancing back up for Britney. They were choreographing for Michael Jackson. They were a part of this culture and this history, and you're the kid and you're the student and you're learning about the history of the music, you're learning about the history of the movement, but you're also there with people who are defining the current zeitgeist of music and movement. And I find that really interesting, and even that impact on pop culture. This is hilarious. I saw on Instagram recently someone had posted about Jennifer Lopez in her I'm Real era, and showed a picture of a backup dancer and was like, oh, this is, remember Chris Judd? And I was like, I didn't mean to be rude, but I was like, that's not Chris Judd, but I get how, he flew under the radar. But it's like, I used to take class from Chris Judd, and someone else had posted something about, this was funny. This girl did her rendition of the combination from the Lady Gaga's Bad Romance music video.
Yes.
And she was so funny because she was like doing sound effects throughout the whole thing. And I was like, somebody call back up Lorianne Gibson and get this girl hired. And it's just so funny seeing how people who are not in the dance world perceive these people who have been woven into like the fabric of the culture.
Oh, absolutely. And kind of to piggyback on what you were saying too in those conventions, but you probably can attest to this. Like, it's so like, as a kid, when you're hearing, oh, this person, danced for J-Lo or Britney, you're just like awestruck. You're like, these people have made it. And it's just it's intimidating, but it's exciting because, like you said, you're getting that firsthand experience with those people that are really defining the culture. And I remember when I was 8, we probably have done the same dance conventions, which is funny to think about.
Yeah.
But I remember when I was 8, I took a dance convention that toured all over the U.S. And I remember one of the guys that was teaching, he was the choreographer for Britney Spears' music video for Oops, I Did It Again. And he taught us the choreography in 7, I think it was 7 or 8 at the time. I looked at my mom because my mom was sitting in on the classes and kind of observing. I just remember looking over like just that wide eye, like, I've made it, like, this is like my dream right here. And I remember going to school as soon as like that convention was over, and I was like, you guys, look, I know this choreography, I learned it. And they're like, okay, like, you're weird, but it was so exciting, and you don't get that experience unless you go to those conventions, and it's one of the most cool, fun experiences I think I've had in my youth, is getting that firsthand.
You'd mentioned how when you go to these conventions, you're starstruck, you're awestruck, because when you're a kid, you think that being a backup dancer is like the way to make it in life. You think that the only career path or choices lead to dance. You're either a dancer, you're a dance teacher, or you're a dance studio owner. And truly until, you know, you turn 17, you have to decide what you want to do for the entire rest of your life. That was it for me up until that point. And I think that the difficulties in pursuing that avenue professionally, it was something really, really hard to grapple with, the kind of reality that you have to face. But also with that fantasy of like getting to be so close to people and an experience that shapes you and that shapes culture. And I think we're the kind of people who are so engaged in culture, in music, in dance, and ultimately, and I say this is why I do everything, the podcast, everything, to bring people together and help people feel like a part of something.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and it's hard too, because like you said too, like when you turn 17, you're faced with that ultimate decision of, you know, do I do this? But it's really hard too, and especially for people who aren't in the dance world to understand, is there's definitely an expiration date for having a dance career. And it sucks to say, but it's definitely like once you hit, you know, 25, it's like that's kind of the end, and it's unfortunate. And I have so much respect and applaud so many dancers that just keep pushing through that, you know, their 40s, and I'm just like, you guys are so, like, it's so cool to see that, but it's really hard because everybody wants, you know, young teenagers, and it's one of the most overworked, underpaid industries. You're going to classes, you're going to auditions, and very seldomly do you ever land, you know, gigs out of that. Or, you know, if you do, they're so poorly paid, you know, it covers your gas for maybe 2 weeks, if that, 2 days. I mean, depending upon how, you know, large the, you know, the gig is, it's just one of those industries that's so competitive. And it's like, it's not even you have to compete with yourself. Like you just got to bust your butt like nonstop.
Mentally, it's really hard being a dancer and having to deal with pressures ever since you were a child. And it's very easy when you're used to it and that's your norm. But then when you zoom out and you've had life experience and you're like, wait a second, maybe that constant pressure I was putting on myself isn't normal. I mean, what does normal mean anyway? But it's not normal to put that much pressure on yourself, and to realize, you know what? If I want to be creative, if I want to be expressive, whatever those values make me who I am, that come out when I'm dancing, there are other ways that I can channel that too. And that if I do want to dance going forward for my enjoyment, for my expression, to have fun, then I can do that without tying this pressure to it. Because when I would go to classes, in early 2020, I would put so much pressure on myself and be like, well, this is it. Or like, well, I had a full-time fashion job, but everyone else in the room is a professional dancer trying to be noticed, trying to be seen. Right. And
you get so caught up in the comparison game. And that's one of the hardest things too, is to like just focus on yourself and like your abilities and just not look at everybody else in the room. And like you said, they might be doing this professionally full time and you're like, oh my gosh, but and I think that's one of the nice takeaways too, is I think now if you do pursue something like that as an adult, there's so many good, at least where I live, I know there's so many good programs, and there's drop-in classes you can do that have kind of a, competitive feel, but it's also like, hey, like we're a little rusty. It's just, we're here to have fun, but it's still kind of that same element, but without those high stakes still. But I've actually danced most of my 20s, continued that. I danced pro for a couple teams, and I've danced on some like hip hop teams and such like that. But it's hard, and it's one of those like things that kind of smack you in the face too. Like for example, I was teaching last year, and I was helping assist like a cheer tumbling class, and they were like, "Can you still do an aerial?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can." I should not have attempted that. And I was like, yeah, I can. But then like, it's like one of those harsh reminders where like your body's like, nope, you haven't done that in years. You can't just go out there and throw that just out of the blue. Like it's one of those things where you realize like how much progress like you lose if you don't stay up on it. But it's like, how often do I really need to be tumbling as in somebody in my 30s? But what I mean?
Yes, I totally understand that. But I think that being this age and kind of seeing how things turned out and being able to be proud of this version of yourself and be like, you know what? This is somebody that my teenage self would want to be. This is like, I think that I am cool, and I can tell my 13-year-old self that because I am me. Like, I still am me. I am a composite of every version of me. And that reminds me of kind of a theme of, which I know is one of your favorite 2000s movies, 13 going on 30.
Yes.
I always joke that I'm 30 going on 13 because I'm just obsessed with, the 2000s. But that idea of 30, flirty, and thriving, it's so cool to, because of course the context of the movie where a child dreams about how glamorous and cool they're going to be when they grow up. But now that I am that grown up, I'm like, wait, yes, glamour, and yes, coolness.
Yes, absolutely. And it's really funny because I actually saw that movie in theaters with my mom when I was 13. And I remember, and it's one of those movies, like, I don't know if you ever have this experience, but like when you watch a movie when you're a kid and then you start to like watch it gradually at different stages in your life, and you're like, oh, like for me, like I watched movies where I related to more of the kids, and then now that I'm, my age now, I go, oh, I kind of get, like, I start to empathize with the parents or the adults a little bit more that are often like villainized in kids movies and so forth. And it's just interesting because I saw that movie when I was 13, and I just kept thinking of like, oh, it'd be so cool to be 30, and like now here I am. And yeah, it's weird. And that's honestly one of my favorite movies. And that was one of the first movies that really like introduced me to like the idea of designer and like glam. And because the wardrobe and the accessories in that movie are just top tier. That is one of my all-time favorite movies with like fashion for like the Y2K era, because it was so colorful, and I loved how they incorporated that fun style to make like Jennifer Garner stand out, because mentally she's still 13, but she still has that fun, colorful personality, and I love how they show that. But it's funny because like now here we are in 2022, and all of those styles are like back in style, and it's weird to see that come back to fruition. I'm definitely not mad about it, because I'm like, it was popular when I was 13, and now I'm 30 and I can still rock the same thing. It's kind of cool, actually.
I love that. I saw a tweet recently that I actually laughed out loud at. It said, okay, now Bennifer is married, so we need Jennifer Garner to do the right thing and marry Mark Ruffalo.
I love that. Oh,
that's our dream 13 going on 30 couple.
Oh my gosh. It's funny is whoever casted that movie, and I see, like, I remember seeing like a bunch of memes, and I think I've been seeing them like recently, but like whoever did the casting for that movie deserves like recognition on the highest level, because they did not skip a beat for casting people who literally looked identical. And it's weird now because the girl who played young Jenna, she's in her 30s now, and she's on TikTok, and I cannot believe how much she resembles 30-year-old Jennifer Garner now. And I'm just like shocked. I'm like, this played out so well.
Yeah, I think it has been really funny. When I first got on TikTok, she was someone that I saw a lot, and it was when she was 29. And so she was leading up to, the big reveal at age 30. And I think that's what's so cool, is seeing an entire generation now grow up. And even like when Jenna got older and went and did the Thriller dance, it's like that's the same as us doing a dance to, Khalees's
like
milkshake or something.
Right. All those like weird DJ pop-ups they used to have at like middle school lunches, and where we would do all these like choreographed dances. I mean, I would still do Thriller if, given the chance. If I'm at a party, I'm like, I would be out there on the floor now. I'm like, I don't care how old I am. We're always doing the Thriller if it comes on.
I know. I saw another post that was like, I hate when people say that, breaking out into song and dance in real life is unrealistic, because if it is, you have the wrong friends.
Oh my gosh, I feel like it's so realistic. I mean, especially for like theater kids, that is just another Tuesday. I feel like.
And you love theater too. I was so consumed with dance. I did cheerleading for a little bit, but I was like, you have to work with my schedule. I was like super into my one activity. Did you do dance and did you do theater also?
I did. I had a crazy schedule as a teenager, and I honestly don't know how I had time to eat and breathe. 'Cause I did theater in high school. I never did any like community theater, anything like that. Also because my mom was choreographer of my high school. And so I started going to the school. My mom started working there when I was in middle school. And so my mom would take me like on a Saturday where they were doing like, they would block out, a 6-hour day to choreograph 3 numbers. And I just remember like being 11 and 12 and I was like, I want to do this. I want to do this, because it was perfect, because you're integrating, acting, singing, and dancing all at the same time. And so I started teaching at the studio when I was like middle school, high school. So I would teach a couple classes a week, but then I would go to school. I have like a 0 period. I was taking like extra classes. So I'd be at school from like 6:15 in the morning to like 6:15 at night. And then I would go after I was done with school and I would teach for a couple hours or take classes, and I wouldn't even get home till like 9 or 10. So like I look back now and I just go, how on earth did I have a social life? Which it was very minimal other than theater, but I don't know. I really loved like the theater aspect, because, growing up in dance, you're using those same songs to perform to, because oftentimes, if you're doing a Broadway or show number, it's those same things, but it's like, why not just do it in person and do it all at once? So, but yeah, I love theater so much. I spent 4 years I did musical theater. I did a little bit of like the comedy theater. I think I did a total of 8 or 9 stage shows in my high school career. So it was one of my favorite experiences of high school.
I love that. What are your favorite Broadway shows of all time?
Oh man. So I only seen a couple like Broadway shows in person. One of my all-time favorites, well, 2 of my all-time favorites. I love Into the Woods and I love Sweeney Todd, but they're also written by the same composer, Stephen Sondheim, which I know he just passed away recently, which kind of broke my heart. But I'm always drawn to composer styles where I feel like the music is all very different from one another, and I feel like it tells a story really well. But I love that there's so many, especially Into the Woods, there's a lot of good integration between characters and they overlap, and it all kind of creates a story enmeshed with one another. And Sweeney Todd, I think I liked Sweeney Todd a lot more after I saw the Tim Burton version, because I don't know if you're familiar with the stage show, but the stage show is so different than how the Tim Burton movie was portrayed. Because in the stage show, Johnny Depp, like how he played, Sweeney Todd.
Sweeney Todd.
Yeah, that's how he was designed in the stage show. But in the stage show, everybody else looks normal. It's just him. So it's like they kind of isolate him to be this weird outcast guy, which I love how they kind of ran with the whole dark element, because that's typical Tim Burton. But I think it made it overall just a lot more interesting and appealing to me. But then I kind of revisited the soundtrack and like the show, and I'm just like, this is actually written really well. So
yeah, it's interesting how we were talking about music discovery earlier too, because I remember I used to listen to Broadway musical soundtracks, and especially when like iTunes came into play, because you would get to discover more Broadway musical soundtracks. And right, I couldn't just afford to go to a bunch of Broadway shows.
Right.
But yeah, I remember the Hairspray soundtrack that played over and over and over again. I saw Wicked on a school field trip soon after it came out, and I like died. I was literally bawling my eyes out. I've seen it a few times over the years, and I just bawl my eyes out every single time.
It's such a good show too, and I loved it when they had Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth. Just the two of them are just powerhouses on their own.
Yes, and right, I had seen it with the original cast, and
I'm so
at the time, it's like you don't know. Like I hadn't seen Rent the Broadway play, and again, I was in middle school, so I was really not the target audience for having seen Rent years earlier on Broadway, and this was before Rent the movie, and so I didn't know who Idina Menzel was. I didn't know who Kristen Chenoweth was. It wasn't until after the show became this phenomenon that you were like, oh, wow, I got to see something like super, super special that's not going to be around forever.
Right. Well, and especially like when those shows first come out, those original cast members they set the tone for the duration of however long that stage show runs. And that, that is like the goal. It's the same thing, you know, like with Hamilton. Like that, I mean, it's huge now, and I actually didn't watch that one till 2020 because I just, you know, being an adult and stuff like that, you just don't always have the time. But I remember sitting down and I was like, holy cow, this is so good.
If you were to make, so crossing over your love for theater and emo things, if you were to make a Broadway musical and feature emo songs in it, what would it kind of be about?
Oh man, I feel like so much of like the videos that I make on social media kind of like set the stage. I'm a huge My Chemical Romance fan, and
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, they were my first introduction into that genre because again, like you said too, like, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of ways to discover music, and I remember so every morning before school I would wake up and I'd get up early just so I could watch music videos before school. And I'd get them watched on VH1, I'd watch MTV. I didn't have Fuse. I wasn't one of those cool kids. But that was like when they were first like coming out. And I remember just being like 12 and I was like, what? Like it just turned my world upside down. And I was like, because again, like Helena has a ballerina and it has somebody dancing in the video. And I was like, I want to run with that. So I love, and that's one of the things that I really love about My Chemical Romance is like from their albums from start to finish, they have a story. There's a story of characters and you follow, and every song tells a story about the characters from start to finish. And I love that I almost want to do, like, if I was to create something, it would be something along the lines of like Helena, where it's like that dark sort of like ballerina feel. Which, funny story, I posted a couple videos on TikTok, but I did a dance for my 8th grade talent show to Helena. And
that's amazing.
And I handmade my costume, and I basically recreated the whole Helena look. And I remember dancing for like it was like the last day of school. It was a huge, huge ordeal. And I remember that's the first time I've ever gotten a standing ovation because I was not super social. I was not a popular kid. I didn't have a lot of friends. I kind of just kept to myself and I kind of isolated myself from people just because I was into like some weird stuff. And I remember that was the first time where people were like, this is so cool. And I was like, what? What? Like, you consider me cool? What? Like, I was shocked. But I feel like it would be something kind of like dark, like Black Parade-esque. I wouldn't want to keep it like the exact same, but honestly, if My Chemical Romance came out with a musical, I would not be mad. So I feel like anything that they take and create out of it, it would probably mirror something similar to that.
My Chemical Romance, the musical. I'm really here for it. This is basically like our brainstorming session for which emo band is going to somehow come across this, listen, and be inspired to start writing that musical. They already have some source material. And then
like Green Day figured it out. They have a show, so.
Right. Clearly, if they could do it, someone needs to follow in their footsteps. I am ready. There are so many movies that become Broadway shows that just don't resonate with people. But I think that when music is already at the core of the product, you know, if you take a movie that's not a musical and try to make it into a Broadway play, it may or may not translate. Whereas if you're taking something that's already inherently musical, I think that's such an easier adaptation.
Yeah, and even like a rock opera style too. You could just create it something along the storylines and use the dialect and something like that. I have not personally seen American Idiot, the Green Day show, but I know it exists and it's been really successful. But yeah, I just think it's really cool that people, and like you said too, not every movie or every musical lands or resonates. I will say I actually just saw The Heathers the musical. That was my first time seeing it. I saw it at a community theater with one of my friends a couple months ago, and that was one of the ones where I was surprised that it translated so well that I almost liked the musical more than I liked the movie. And that doesn't happen for me very often. So
Wow.
I don't know if you've seen that stage show or listened to the soundtrack. It's gorgeous, and they do such a good job with it.
I should listen to the soundtrack. I've seen the movie and I love the movie, so I'm definitely going to listen to the soundtrack. And I went to see Mean Girls on Broadway very soon after it came out. I found out it was coming out, and then I'm like, okay, I'm getting tickets for the week it opens or whatever. Yeah. So I was so excited, and I went with my group of best friends, and it was good because it was different enough from the movie, because of course I'm fall into that category of people who could probably give a one-person show reciting
right.
the script of Mean Girls.
Same.
But I think it was different enough where you're not constantly comparing it to the movie. It's something that can stand out on its own, and I think they're actually making a movie of the musical, which is funny because they made a movie, made it into a musical, and then they're making that into a movie. It's
Love that.
I guess it's very cyclical. I don't know.
Well, that's one of the movies I feel like that's just inherently stood the test of time in a very realistic way, because even like the styles have now come back, but even like you don't meet somebody very often that hasn't seen Mean Girls, or they're like, oh, that movie that wasn't good. Like everybody agrees. Like that's one of the things that we can all like mutually agree on, that movie just will forever be good.
I think it's really funny too, because sometimes when people are like, I was born in the wrong decade, or like I was born in the wrong time or whatever, I absolutely was not, because first of all, it's like you were 13 when 13 going on 30 came out. I was 22 when 22 by Taylor Swift came out. I was in 8th grade when Mean Girls came out. Things like that, where the timing of it, it's like, wow, you really feel like, and granted, Mean Girls is it's a great representation of the monoculture, because literally everyone thinks that Mean Girls is speaking to them personally, even though it is something that the majority of people have seen, consumed, or have some kind of relationship to. But I mean, there's just nothing like being in that situation. I remember going to see Mean Girls in theaters with a bunch of mean girls, and I was
really?
like,
oh man,
I was like, this movie hits a little bit too close to home.
Probably super awkward coming out of the theater. You're like looking like side to side. You're like, oh, which one? Like you're trying to like size up your friends. You're like, which one of you were Regina? Which one of you were Gretchen? Like you're probably like looking out like, ooh, that would be tough.
It was tough, and I think it's funny too, because even just being kind of in the nostalgia niche now, I'm sure you do this too, where you have such opportunities to, or like you're creating a piece of content that reminds you of something. And for me, I think the biggest difference between me, then as a teenager or a preteen versus now is like I have this self-awareness and this idea of how I'm perceived. And back then it's like I didn't, almost like, it's not that I didn't know that those kind of social hierarchies existed, but I think that I just didn't understand, like the Regina at school. I didn't understand why someone would act that way.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree too. And I think also too, especially having a lot of friends in dance, and if those same friends didn't go to your school per se, it could feel a little isolating too, kind of like a Regina George situation, because you didn't have like that friends. And so like to an outsider's perspective, it would be like, oh, like why is this girl like not socializing or anything, with other people? And I feel like that kind of subjects you to a culture like that too, which that can, I mean, nobody really wants to make high school any harder, but it does exist. It definitely does.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the different perceptions of people, and based on, especially with teenagers, with everyone's lack of life experience and everyone's insecurities. And I've really been fascinated by that idea of awareness and perception, where here I am thinking I'm the Katie, or I'm even the Karen, but other people might look at your group from the outside and see Regina.
Yeah.
And you don't have control over how other people perceive you or your group. And just like how they're going through the cafeteria, it's so easy to put labels on people and to put people in boxes. And just natively, that's not how I think.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm with you there.
Yeah. And have to kind of reconcile with that and be like, wow, now I'm in my 30s and I can challenge these perceptions that other people have had of me, or that I've held of myself, and what does that say? And as all of these trends come back, as all of these styles, as all of the things that remind us of this time that we did have the firsthand experience in, how do we look back and see that differently? I think it's super interesting.
Oh, absolutely, too. Well, and I think even, you know, and I talked about this a little bit too, publicly on social media, but I think a lot of like the 2000s culture, it was very size up your friends, but it was so frowned upon to be put a label on. Like, for example, like I do primarily like, you know, emo scene nostalgia, but one of the funny things too is that I label it now of that, but back then that was considered like a slap in the face to be called emo, because you didn't want to be put in that box. And it was like an insult if somebody said that to you, even though that's what you were, or what kind of like the classification of subculture you fell into. It was still really frowned upon too. But you know, things change, and I'm kind of glad that they've shifted as well too. And I feel like nowadays people are a lot more inclusive towards each other, and there isn't like those barriers that existed. And I think with the power of social media, I think, you know, kids growing up, because I mean, they're basically, you know, growing up with social media from the time they're born. And so they you know, they get, you know, middle school, high school, and they know they're, you know, running a full on business basically. So, and like, you know, we were kind of left to like our own devices to kind of figure out, you know, how it worked. And it was just still very new. But I think it's made kids, or I can't speak for everybody, but I think it's kind of made people realize there's a more human side to it now. So I don't think people are necessarily sizing people up as much, if that makes sense.
I remember I had a roommate in college who had been in the popular clique in high school, and I wasn't. So I was like, oh, well, I wasn't popular. But it's like, but that's not what popularity means. And I think seeing like, no, I'm the girl that knows everybody. Everyone knows me as like the girl who dances, whatever. And seeing it in that way, and then seeing what kind of perceptions people have tied up in that, you're like, whoa, I totally missed all of, and I guess when you're a teenager, it's not really your job to like psychoanalyze everything.
Right.
But as we like looking at the past through a contemporary lens, it's like, well, what the hell? Like, what have we learned in the last 20 something years? And how can we look back on what happened in order to live the lives that we want to now and make the future better for us and for everybody?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting to kind of, you said psychoanalyze like how you were, because I still have questions too, like where I'll run into people like I went to school with, or I'll see them and they're like, who are you? I'm like, oh, like I didn't talk to a whole lot of people. I just performed, and that was kind of like my love language too. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see like how like your perception of yourself, or like kind of understanding how that perception was now, like you said, through like a contemporary lens. I love that analogy. That's actually a really good analogy.
This podcast's tagline is deep conversations about superficial things. And so that is what we do. We look back on things that happened, and now we might be like, excuse me, what? We said that, we did that, this movie said that, this movie did that. And it's now we only have the context of what's going on currently, whereas then we were a product of whatever that cultural zeitgeist was. So whatever we were doing then, no matter how cringe or whatever we see it now, it was normal and expected back then.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, yeah, as we get more life experience, as we get more information, our perceptions change, and like we grow and we learn, and that's how we move forward as a society. And ultimately we end up seeing pop culture that's made as a result of the now. And no matter what kind of t-shirt was in style, no matter what kind of haircut was in style, we're ultimately able to look back and see how it's a product of that exact time, which is why if I showed you a picture from 2001 versus 2007, you would be like, oh yeah, distinctly different. But to maybe someone who wasn't there, they'd be like, oh, the 2000s? Like, I don't know. And it is so obvious, I think, especially when the trend cycle repeats and things come back, where things get so specific. And I think in seeing your videos and even just seeing your hair, I'm like, it takes me back so specifically. Is that your real hair that you use?
So funny story. So I actually started with my real hair, and I was doing it for about a year. And then I recently just had a lot of like health issues. And so like my hair can't sustain the amount of teasing that it requires. So I did have to switch to a wig, but for the first year, it was my real hair. And I will say I was sad to switch to a wig, but I'm also really relieved because I don't have to like strategize my shower days quite so meticulously anymore. It just makes getting ready a heck of a lot easier.
That wig looks amazing. I'm like, because my whole life until I turned 30, my hair was like down to my hips. I had long hair forever. It's actually now weird looking back at pictures of me with long hair because I'm like, that's so not me anymore. But it was so who I was. So even just seeing your wig, I'm like, oh my God, should I get a 2000 scene wig?
I love it. And I did have to cut it a little bit because it wasn't quite like it wasn't as full as I would have hoped. And I'm probably going to be adding some more to it just because the ends are getting a little thin. But yeah, it's kind of fun to just put it on and be like, holy crap. Cause I wore it out to, I've worn it to emo night a couple of times. I've gone and people are like, oh my, like people get so excited. They're like, your hair looks amazing. And I'm like, thank you. Like, it's kind of cool to like, I didn't get to have like that extreme hair when I was a kid. So I'm like, now I get to like live that. And it's fun to just put on a wig and just, rock it for a little bit and kind of have like a different persona per se. So I recommend it.
I really love that. And I wanted to thank you so, so much for being here with me today.
Thank you.
Of course, I absolutely love all of the different things that we chatted about, from dance to theater to emo culture, and how those things all tie in, and how us not wanting to put ourselves in those boxes, it shows that all of those different parts, seemingly unrelated parts, can all come together as one.
Absolutely. And they can absolutely coexist too.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you again. And thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
That's a wrap for this week. If you like Nicstalgia, please connect with me on social, subscribe to the Nicstalgia newsletter at nicstalgia.substack.com, and follow, rate, review on your platform of choice. Everything's linked in the show notes, including where to find more about our guest of the week. Thank you so, so much for your support. And that was this week's episode of Nicstalgia.